So as we all probably know, A2 is a burst type 3 attacker that also has the rocket launcher weapon. A2's kit is actually very simple and very straightforward, but I want to go over this very quickly because I do think that there's a few things that we need to mention. And one thing I do want to mention is that her normal attack scaling is actually slightly higher compared to the other rocket launcher units. So normally, a rocket launcher character is going to have around 60 to 63% on their attack scaling, but for A2's case, she actually has 67.65%. Which might not seem like a big difference, but when you start to enter into the higher investment territory, you will start to notice the difference between a 60% scaling versus a 67.65. Moving on, let's talk about her skills very quickly. Just like what I mentioned before, her kit is actually very simple. Her skill 1 and skill 2 are both passive skills that are going to give her more buffs to increase her damage. Her skill 1 is going to increase charge damage and as well as explosion rages. This is very useful, especially against bosses that have breakable parts that are very close together. And since A2 is a fire character, the effect from this skill is going to be very effective against a lot of the wind type enemies. So you're looking at Altyson, Obelisk, and even against the new blacksmith boss in the upcoming solo raid. And then moving on to her skill 2, this will basically deal extra damage to the enemy, and it also has another effect that will increase your damage to enemy parts. So just looking at these two abilities, it already looks like she's incentivized to actually do fully charged attacks. And then lastly, we have her burst. Her skill 1 and skill 2 are very simple, but this is what I would consider to be her gimmick. So her burst mode B is going to increase her attack and charge speed by a pretty significant amount. But the only catch is it will decrease her current HP by a certain percent. And all these effects are going to be permanent as long as A2's HP doesn't drop below 40%. And it's also important to keep in mind that when you do upgrade this ability, not only does the attack and charge speed increase, the damage that she is taking from this also becomes smaller. It is definitely worth investing on this for the lower damage. So overall, her kit is very simple. You have 2 passives and 1 active skill that has a gimmick, but if you do have a very good healer, then you don't really need to worry about the HP decrease that she is getting. And then next up, we have the Harmony Cubes. For this character, you have 2 options. So the best one is going to be Resilience. This is just overall really good for any character because by using this, it gives your character a lower downtime. And I would say that Bastion is also going to be useful, especially when you still don't have any overload gear. But once you get a few more rolls of maximum ammo capacity, then I would say that you're better off using the other cubes. Alright, so next up, let's talk about the team compositions. So earlier today, before she even got released, I actually made a list of the characters that I think will work the best with A2. So in this section, we're gonna be going over each one according to their burst type. So the first character we have is Sakura, and I'm gonna be putting a big asterisk in this character. Sakura's skill 1 is going to give her team a ton of defense, which is going to be very useful for A2 because especially when she starts to lose HP, you wouldn't want her to lose more HP whenever she gets hit. So every single bit of defense from this is going to be very useful. Sakura's skill 2 also has some utility, but I would say that it's only decent. Yes, you get more damage to projectiles, but this will only apply to that specific projectile that you're currently hitting. And if anything, the only good part about this is the second effect, because it will actually decrease your burst skill cooldown by quite a significant amount. And the skill cooldown reduction is actually going to increase every time you upgrade this skill. And then Sakura's burst is also good, but keep in mind that this will scale based on her attack, so you do need quite a bit of investment in Sakura herself if you really want to make her work. It's kind of hard to recommend using this character outside of Altyson or the upcoming solo raid boss, because for one, she's a burst type 1 character that has a 40-second cooldown, so you will be forced to a 2-1-2 formation, which might not be the best thing for some cases. And another reason is that I don't think a lot of people have this character built. So even if on paper she does sound better than the other characters, the most likely case is that you have other support characters built, which will then be better options for A2. And for the next burst 1 character, we have Dorothy. Dorothy is really good specifically against boss fights, because not only is Dorothy really good for that type of content, but she also increases the damage to parts for all of your allies. So because A2 has an insane AoE on her normal attacks, this will be very useful. Just like what I said earlier, the main bosses that you're going to destroy using A2 is Altyson and the upcoming solo raid boss, and each of the breakable parts that they have are very close to each other. So having more damage to parts on top of the different buffs that A2 has, that will make her very effective against bosses. And then for the next one, we have Rapunzel. Rapunzel is just a really good character to pair with A2 because she gives so much healing that can help A2 get above the 40% threshold. Although I would say that she is not really the best healer option if you're looking for both healing and more damage output. But Rapunzel is still definitely a viable option. And then moving on, let's talk about the characters in the burst type too. So Admi is obviously going to be useful because she is just generally good to pair with characters that have charge attacks. And then for the next one, we have Blanc. I do think that Blanc is going to be the best healer to pair with A2, just because she is providing so much healing at the beginning of your burst and as well as at the end. And of course, for you to be able to pull off this amount of healing, you of course need to use Noir with Blanc, so that you have the 20-second cooldown burst instead of 60. So if you have these two characters, you will have no problem when it comes to keeping A2's HP above 40%. And another good thing is that Noir will actually buff A2's ammo, so that is going to be really good, especially because this will activate when entering full burst. And another decent option is actually going to be Uni. Uni is more like a pocket healer that you will use if for some reason your Rapunzel doesn't have good enough healing. And then for the next character, we have Alice, who I think is one of the best burst type 3 characters to pair with A2. Simply because A2 and Alice have really good synergy in terms of the supports that they have in common, and as well as Alice being able to buff A2 with her skill 1. And for the next one, if you do decide to use Blanc and Noir on a different team outside of A2's team, then I would say that you can either go for Maxwell or Helm, depending on who your burst 1 and burst 2 character is. If you already have good enough healing from your burst 1 and burst 2 character, then it's probably better to go with Maxwell for more damage. But if you feel like you don't have enough healing, then I would say that you can go for a Helm. So in this section, we're going to be testing her out in the shooting range, and I will also go a lot more in depth with her kit, because there's actually something interesting about this. Alright, so as you can see, I'm trying my best to fire her normal attacks as fast as I can. So I'm trying to animation cancel it and whatnot, but it's still not as fast as your normal rocket launcher characters. The reason for this is there is actually a slight delay at the end of her attack. So if you see, bam, she doesn't immediately take cover. So I will hold the attack, let go. It's like half a second after you let go before she takes cover. So that in itself is stopping you from using her as a battery, which is kind of unfortunate because she actually has insane burst energy generation. Boom. For me personally, I don't really think that this is a big deal because when you take a look at her kit, she gets a lot of charge damage increase, she has an insane AoE, so it really incentivizes you to perform fully charged attacks on A2. Fastest charge attack that I was able to do was around 105%. And it's very hard to do. Oh, I did 103 right there. But it's very hard to do because if you let go of the attack too early, the charge attack will actually be cancelled. So that is quite unfortunate. So now we're gonna be testing her out with an actual team. So for the burst 1 characters, we have Rapunzel, Dorothy, and then let's go for Alice. And then for the burst 2, let's go with Admi. The main thing we're paying attention to is if Rapunzel can actually keep her HP up to 40%. So normally you would use Alice to charge her burst. Boom. And now A2's HP is starting to go down. But can Rapunzel keep this up at 40%? I would say that it's currently at 70, 65. That is actually pretty good. 31 million versus 28.3 versus 27.6. Yeah, that is pretty good. Considering that A2 only has level 4 skills, Alice has, I think, she has a highly invested skill 1 and burst, and Dorothy has level 5 on everything, plus overload gear. Now let's try out Blanc and Noir. And for the third character, I guess let's go with Alice again. There we go. Blanc should be able to get her HP above 40% 100% of the time because she is healing for so much during and at the end of full burst. Boom. Oh, for this one, A2 got left behind. 38 million, 36.6, then 32.7. But the good thing is that her HP is not even 50% or 60. It's very high. Yeah, I think that Blanc, A2, and Noir is going to be a really good combination, especially because Noir also benefits A2 because of the ammo buff. That looks really good. So I would say A2 is decent and usable against Chatterbox, but you honestly have better options, especially because the big AoE is not going to be useful against enemies like this, where yes, you want to break most of the breakable parts, but Chatterbox says that one specific part that if you break, you're kind of screwed. So yeah, that is going to do it for my day 1 first impressions for A2. I think that she is a really good character with high investment, although she is not as interesting as 2B, because 2B is our very first defender DPS that opens up a lot of new team compositions, and on the flip side, A2 is more of like your typical burst type 3 DPS. I do think that she is very fun to use because in general, rocket launcher units are just very fun in my opinion, and also having that high risk, high reward gameplay is very satisfying to me. So if I were to rate A2 right now, from early to mid game in the campaign, I would say that she is going to be double S tier for both the early parts and the later parts of the campaign. Just because you will always encounter stages that have a lot of enemies, and A2 having the best AoE in the game is going to be very useful. But I would say that for solo boss fights, I'm probably going to put her at double S tier as well. And the reason being is because yes, she is really good against bosses that have multiple breakable parts, but outside of that, especially just like what we saw for Chatterbox, she is not really performing that well. So because of that, I don't really see her being all that useful outside of bosses that have multiple breakable parts, and as well as bosses that spawn multiple enemies like the mother whale. So in short, solo bosses, she is probably S tier, and for bosses with ads, I would say that she is triple S tier. And for PvP, it's hard to say, but depending on how much AoE she actually does in PvP, if she can hit like 4 enemies at the same time, then maybe she's double S tier, but I'm probably gonna give her an A tier for PvP. So to summarize, I'm gonna give her a double S tier rating for both early and late campaign. She's going to be S tier for solo bosses, triple S tier for bosses with ads, and A tier for PvP. So yeah, let me know what you think about this character and if you're pulling for her. And if you already have her, let me know what teams you're running with A2. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, definitely make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.